Thank you for joining us. The following presentation is from a webinar titled Professional Ethics, The Three Monkeys in the Room, originally produced on May 14th, 2015. The presenters are Elaine Nissley and Sam BowerCraft from McKonly Asbury. Enjoy the presentation and visit us online at www.macpas.com for more information about our future events and upcoming webinars.
Hello, my name is Elaine Nissley. I'm a principal at McKonly Asbury, where I lead our internal audit and management consulting practice. One of my passions is helping organizations to develop and assess their ethical environment. One of the keys to maintaining an ethical environment is training. I hope you enjoy and take away at least one point of interest from today's webinar. Joining me to add some levity to our session is Samuel BowerCraft, and thank you to all those who are dealing with our technical difficulties.
Welcome back, everybody. Again, this is Sam BowerCraft. I think my voice is different enough from Elaine's that you can recognize me. And we'll carry on with the webinar now. Technology. It's great and wonderful and terrible all at once.
Okay. So everyone has heard of the three monkeys: hear no evil, see no evil, and say no evil. What we see, hear, and subsequently say or do not say has a great impact on our organization. Seeing or hearing something which is unethical or borderline and not saying anything can have ramifications which could result in the loss of jobs or significant exposure for the organization. This presentation will begin with the theory of ethics, discuss the social contract, and give examples of how these concepts influence and affect behavior in the workplace. We will also discuss a self-assessment tool which you can use to assess your ethical leadership style, and a balanced scorecard to measure and track the corporate ethical environment. We will discuss the social contract and how our personal ethical perspective and the ethical perspective of others and the organizations we deal with influence social contracts. We now have a polling question for you to answer. We encourage all of you to participate in responding to the polling question, and we will share the results with everyone as well.
So our first polling question is, do you think people generally behave ethically? Obviously, this is an opinion question. There are no right answers, but there are also no wrong answers. We'll give you a moment to process that and see what kind of answers we get. And it looks like we have plenty of people signed up today, and we're glad we could get everyone to register. I forgot to start playing the Jeopardy music.
Okay. So now, do you think people generally behave ethically? 69% of you think so, and 5% of you do not think that people generally behave ethically, and 26% believe in situational ethics. They think it depends on the circumstances.
Yeah, and one of the things I like to observe in this case is I think frequently ethics varies from time to time, place to place, and person to person. And one of the things that's assumed within a lot of ethical behavior is the moral principles that govern behavior and what people are feeling or seeing at the time and how it drives them. My answer to this question is I think it seems to depend on the circumstances. Of course, ethics also varies from person to person, like cannibalism.
Right. And like when you're sitting here looking at your boss, you have to act a different way, right?
That's not true. I always act the same way, Elaine.
Okay. Okay, now on to some more information here on ethics. Ethics, as Sam indicated, is relative, and it does vary across cultures and between individuals. The Encyclopedia of Philosophy defines ethics in three ways. There's religion-based ethics that is considered by many to be their way of life. There's professional ethics that is usually codified as a professional or organizational code of ethics or code of conduct. And then there's philosophy, which is the study, systemization, defense, and recommendation of concepts of right and wrong behavior. In this presentation, we're going to concentrate on professional ethics, or the rules of conduct or moral code from an organizational perspective, and we're going to relate this to personal ethics and the social contract. We will discuss various ethical perspectives which influence how individuals behave in a business setting. There are many variations of ethical perspectives, and not all organizations will have the same ethical perspective. We will discuss 4 of these perspectives. They are results or consequences, rights and obligations, justice and fairness, and virtue. Within each one of these theories, there are variations and sub-theories, but we're going to do our 10,000-foot flyover version today.
I think one of the interesting things about these 3 areas, whether it's religion-based professional ethics or philosophical ethics, and I think it's very easy to see within the professional ethics arena as well, is the commonality of things that people agree to be ethical. If you look at a lot of the code of ethics, whether it's for certified public accountants or ISACA or the Institute of Internal Auditors, there's a lot of commonalities across those. And I think it's important to recognize that when thinking about ethics within the organization as well, because there's lots of resources for these areas to build from, and looking for those commonalities can be beneficial.
Okay, thank you, Sam. Now on to a little bit about self-interest, because one of the key influences on the application of ethical theories is the idea of self-interest. It is a fundamental aspect of human nature. That is, people may not necessarily be selfish, but they are interested in all matters that relate to themselves, including family, friends, and the society in which they live. While self-interest works and is good, the extremes of selfishness, greed, and avarice do not. Philosophers such as Thomas Hobbes and Adam Smith assert that self-interest leads to cooperation. For example, buyers and sellers are interested in satisfying their individual needs and desires. Sellers want to maximize profits, and buyers want to derive satisfaction and usefulness from their purchases. In order for each to achieve their objectives, they must compromise. Whether a person approaches ethical decision-making based on the principle of self-interest versus selfishness or greed has a big impact on the positive or negative outcome of the decision, regardless of the perspective used to make the ethical decision. Okay. The first perspective of ethics that we're going to talk about is results or consequences. I'll just say results, is based upon the theories of philosophers such as John Locke, Jeremy Bentham, James Mill, and John Stuart Mill. Consequentialism considers ethical behavior in terms of the results or consequences of the ethical decision. This theory of ethics is often adhered to by results-oriented people. It focuses on the impact of the decision and makes an ethical decision based upon acceptability in the term of consequences of the decision. When using consequentialism to make ethical decisions, it is very important that the decision maker assess a broader perspective of society when considering who is impacted by the decision and the associated consequences. For example, if a CEO talks a board of directors into giving the CEO a $1 million bonus, he may derive great happiness from his bonus. One could say that it's a good ethical decision because it promotes happiness. However, if the CEO does not consider the impact on the rest of the organization or society, he's ignoring the broader ethical consequences of his decision, such as the potential for employees to lose their job, increased prices of product or services, and even potentially the demise of the organization. The CEO has acted out of selfishness or greed and not ethically. An ethical decision requires that the decision maker be impartial and not give extra weight to personal feelings or consequences. That is, balanced self-interest, not greed or selfishness. The results principle promotes the greatest happiness for the largest number of people, but it does not imply that the Machiavellian principle of the ends justifies the means is acceptable. Another issue with the results theory is that it assumes that we can measure happiness and make a fair assessment of the best distribution of happiness. Should the CEO give everyone a 5% increase and slightly raise the happiness of all? Or should the CEO give a significant increase to top management and greatly increase the happiness of this elite team? Since this theory only focuses on consequences, it ignores motivation, which leaves many people unsatisfied with this theory. This is an example of saying the road to hell is paved with good intentions. To balance the emphasis on consequences, one uses another ethical theory which relates to behavior.
Yeah, and one of the things that struck me in this slide is the focus on the impact of the decision and how it benefits a larger group of people. The prior slide talked about self-interest and how behavior is frequently driven by self-interest and a very egocentric view. We view the world through our own eyes and our own experiences. And a lot of ethical behavior requires an evaluation of a broader context and perspective. And I think one of the interesting things that I've seen in the work that we do is that frequently unethical behavior fails to take into account a broader spectrum. So that egotistical view versus the empathy view. And I think if anyone really thinks about people who have behaved in those ways, unethical ways, there's a lack of empathy about how their actions really impact other people.
I agree, Sam. And then we move on to rights and obligations. So this theory is called Deontology, and it's based upon the motivation of the ethical decision maker. Immanuel Kant is the main philosopher associated with this theory. Kant indicates that the basis for deontology is that an action is ethically correct even if it does not produce a balance of good or evil. This theory is based upon one acting out of a sense of duty regardless of the consequences to themselves. So Kant has two laws that one can apply to determine an ethical decision based upon rights and obligations. The first is the categorical imperative. This law assumes that everyone who is in a similar situation acts the same way because the imperative must be obeyed. It assumes that there are ethical laws which must be obeyed. In addition, an action is ethically correct only if you are willing for everyone in the same situation to act the same, even if you are adversely affected by the decision. For example, if you say it is acceptable for you to lie to your investors about your financial statements, then you cannot say that it is unacceptable for someone to lie about financials which could adversely affect you. So the second part of this theory is using what is called the practical imperative. This law says that everyone must be treated equally and everyone has moral worth. For example, if a company hires an individual to perform consulting work, the company charges a billing rate which is much higher than the rate paid to the employees and makes a profit. As long as the employer treats the employees as individuals with moral worth and recognizes that they have the power to make choices, this is acceptable. On the other hand, in the master-slave relationship, the master benefits from the efforts of the slave, but the master does not allow the slave to make choices and treats the slave as if he has no moral worth. This is not acceptable. So deontology does have some weaknesses as well, since it does not take into consideration the consequences. So making a decision based upon one's duties may have negative consequences both for oneself and to others. And to balance this weakness, we use another theory, or the theory of justice and fairness.
Yeah, and this, in the case of Kant, and I'm a big fan of Kant as a philosopher. For me, I've always been fascinated by sort of the idea of truth. So there is truth out there, and the categorical imperative speaks to that. But immediately after that, we talked about the practical imperative, and we start talking about circumstances and situations. It becomes clear that while the idea of truth is nice because it makes a very simple solution because it's absolute, the reality is there are so many circumstances and considerations that if you don't take into account certain circumstances or the environment or the people or the consequences, it can lead to some very interesting behaviors in the name of truth that would otherwise really be viewed as non-positive or unacceptable.
That plus the fact that there are many truths because truth is in the eyes of the beholder.
Well, not according to my mother.
Okay.
Who I love very much.
Yes. Okay, the next theory we're going to talk about is justice and fairness. This theory believes that justice is a mechanism for fairly allocating the limited resources which are available to provide benefits to society. It makes the assumption that people have a legitimate claim on a resource and can justify their claim. What remains is the process for allocation of the benefits and the method to allocate the benefits. So procedural justice is the means for administering justice in a fair and transparent manner. One does not give preference to another person based upon their physical characteristics, such as gender, nationality, height, or based on their socioeconomic status. Laws apply equally to the rich and the poor. In business, ethics procedural justice is usually equivalent to the standard operating procedures of the organization. Many organizations have ombudsmen or similar positions which will mediate and administer the standards in a just and fair manner. The basis of distributive justice is treating equals equally and unequals in proportion to their differences. One example is the current push to pay overtime to professional salaried employees. The argument is that not all employees are being treated equally. When applying distributive justice, there are three methods: need, arithmetic equality, and merit. So one example is the budget process, where funds are distributed based upon need. The arithmetic process is similar to the process we use with our children when dividing a treat. If one child cuts the candy bar in half, the other child gets to pick the first piece. The third method of merit says that if one person contributes more to a project, then that individual should receive more of the benefits. Justice, then, is a method to treat everyone fairly. In 2005, the average CEO in the United States was paid 262 times what the average worker was paid. According to the theory of justice, this is only fair if paying the CEO that salary results in helping the lowest paid employee within the organization. If not, then the salary is unjust. So according to the theory of justice, an organization's salary structure should be designed to improve the welfare of all employees in the organization and benefit society as a whole.
Yeah, the theory of justice is an interesting one because one of the things that is presumed within this model is that justice or fairness is understood by everyone. I grew up with three older sisters, and when we cut the brownie into equal pieces, there were 3 equal pieces for my sisters, and then whatever small crumbs I could get. And that seemed to be just to the majority of the group, but I was very hungry afterwards. But it really raises the question, what is just and fair? And one of the things that is important in this model, I think, is not only understanding what the perspective is, but also making sure that there's absolute transparency into what is being done and why. Because if a CEO, for example, is paid much more than the other workers, if it's very clear why he's paid that much, then everyone can understand why it is just and fair. But if that isn't apparent or it's not understood, then the model falls.
Right, and then you get unrest and morale issues within the organization. The last theory we're going to talk about today is the theory of the virtue theory of ethics. Virtue ethics is based upon the moral character of the person making the ethical decision. It does not consider actions as either right or wrong or the decision maker good or bad. In the business world, virtue ethics assumes that executives wear 2 hats, one representing their personal values and one representing their corporate values. An example of virtue ethics is Beechnut Corporation executives who were convicted of selling millions of bottles of apple juice which they knew contained little or no apples. Their justification was that they were making decisions necessary for the survival of the organization. These men, who were perpetrating fraud against babies, were also model citizens in their personal lives. A weakness in the virtue theory related to business is that a key virtue for business is integrity. Integrity means that the actions of an organization or person are consistent with their principles. Imagine your boss confidentially telling you the names of 3 people who are being laid off. One of these employees tells you she is buying a condo and can afford it because she has her good job. Do you respect your boss's wishes, not saying anything? Or do you break the spell and the confidence and tell the employee before she signs the papers for the new condo? Betray a trust or show compassion? Both are virtues. Which do you choose? So we now have polling question number 2.
So this next question is, which ethics model do you think drives most people's behavior? Obviously, each of these drives people's behavior in some way or another, but which do you think really most people are driven by? So is it results? Is it an obligation, acting out of a sense of duty? Is it justice? Do people act in a certain way because they seek to have fair and equal treatment? Or is it virtue? Do people behave a certain way because of their moral character? Or if you're just not quite sure, you can say that it's a combination of 2 or more of the above. But I encourage you to pick.
Or as one of our participants said, there is no just and fair in corporate America. It is a structure of haves and have-nots, being the idea that people are equal and unequal.
But that's not an option for the answer for the polling question. So.
That's right. So I just disrupted everybody. No.
So it looks like we have pretty much answers from almost everyone.
Yes.
So a majority of people seem to think that it's a combination of 2 or more of the above, about 70%, and sort of a smattering across the board, with the majority, 12%, thinking that it's most people are driven by their virtue, their moral character drives their behaviors, with sort of 5 to 6% in the other 3. So I think it speaks highly to what we've been talking about throughout the conversation about these different models, which is that the models individually can work, but they don't work singularly by themselves. There is a combination, and I think we're going to talk more about that, why that is, coming up, aren't we?
Yes, we are. Now we're going to move into talking about the application of ethics. And in the organizational environment, there's 3 major types of ethical environments, and each have their own set of ethical issues. There's the systemic, corporate, and individual environments. Systemic ethics relates to the ethical questions about the economic, political, and legal environment in which the organization must operate. That is, ethics related to laws, regulations, social practices of the environment in which the business operates. These are external ethical pressures on the organization. And in this webinar, we're not really going to get into the systemic component of ethics. We're going to talk more about corporate ethics, which relate to the ethical questions about the way an organization operates. And we're going to discuss various components of ethical dilemmas at an organizational level. We're also going to discuss individual ethics, which is a person's ethical reaction and decisions. And we're going to discuss this within the context of how people operate within an organization. So in the beginning, we discussed the 3 monkeys: see no evil, hear no evil, say no evil. And we're going to take you through the process of application of ethical principles and explain why the 3 ethical monkeys are: I saw that, I heard that, I'm going to tell.
And as we discuss, as Elaine goes over the next couple slides, I encourage you to think about these 2 questions. One is, do you find that the ethics in these 3 areas are aligned, or specifically within corporate and individual ethics, are they aligned? And also, what assumptions exist within your organization or for yourself that about how you make these about I wrote this down and my handwriting's terrible. What assumptions have you made about these areas in your organization? So as we go through these next slides, what assumptions have you made about these areas, and are these aligned for your organization and for yourself?
Okay, when it comes to corporate ethics, the ethical cultures within an organization do not happen by chance. People are always watching those at the top and usually emulate the behavior. Organizations can develop a code of conduct or code of ethics, and if they are not consistent with the behavior of those at the top, the culture will not be consistent with the expectations of senior management and the board. One of the ways to assess ethical culture of the organization is to conduct self-assessments. And we're going to discuss 2 of the many tools available to perform an assessment. We will discuss one for leadership ethics and one for organizational ethics. Though these are good tools, I am sure you have all heard the idiom, you cannot see the forest for the trees. This frequently happens when attempting to assess the ethical culture of an organization. It's difficult for insiders who are very involved in the details to step back and conduct an independent assessment of the ethical environment. That is one of the reasons that organizations will engage an independent third party to conduct an ethical perspective audit. We're now going to go over polling question number 3, which is, does your organization proactively address ethics within the company?
So we just want to get a sense of how organizations are addressing ethics and whether they're taking an active role in doing so. Obviously, yes, kind of, and no. And the last one is, if anyone can tell me where that quote comes from, you get a gold star. You can submit it through the questions. I think we have answers from everyone. It looks like the majority of organizations, Star Wars, thank you. Michael, I appreciate that. So a majority of individuals, it seems, have a proactive approach. That's 56%, with another 30% somewhat. 9% is a bit more informal. And apparently 5% of the organizations out there live in a villainous environment and should pay attention to the next couple slides especially.
They're floating around on the Enterprise or something?
That is a completely different story arc.
That's what I thought.
Okay. Thank you, Elaine. All right, carry on with your presentation.
Okay. Next, we're going to discuss individual ethics, and there's many influence on an individual's ethical perspective. The values taught and supported by one's family generally set the basis for individual ethical perspective. There is also the ethics that one learns from their peers and the individual events in their lives. People will also study values and morals. Business students are trained to become business managers, and this training includes training on ethics. Managers should be creative and innovative in the solutions as they solve practical business problems. They should be no less creative when it comes to ethical problems. Managers should use their moral imagination to determine a win-win ethical solution or alternatives. In the business world, we should make decisions that are good for the individual, the firm, and society. In order to make this balanced ethical decision, it is important to balance your decision across the ethical perspectives. This is where studying ethics provides one with a greater perspective and provides the understanding to assess ethical situations in a more balanced fashion. Okay. Now we have polling question number 4. What influences your ethical perspective the most?
All right, so based on your experience, what influences your ethical perspective the most? I think it's interesting because each person's experience in all of these 5 areas varies so greatly that without conversation and discussion about how these areas really influence your behavior now, if we aren't talking to each other about why we're doing what we're doing, then we're making assumptions and presumptions about behavior and the motivations for it. Because while you might perceive that someone is acting out of a virtuous manner, it may be because it's out of duty or because of a results-oriented perspective as well.
Right. And that's where, when it comes to training within an organization, it's important that as managers that we have regular discussions with our employees. We talk through scenarios, talk through ethical decision-making so that we understand and can maybe broaden the ethical perspective of our employees and drive down through the organization the ethical perspective that's embodied in our code of ethics or code of conduct.
Absolutely. So it looks like we have some responses. Before we go to the responses, I'd like to also give a shout-out to Sean, who also got the Star Wars reference correct. Well done, sir. What influences your ethical perspective the most? Looks like primarily it's values, morals, and faith. So personal drive of things that were learned.
After all, we are located in central Pennsylvania, right?
That is true. But I think that's very common. I mean, I think a lot of what drives our behavior internally, even our individual events, family and peers, even from a family perspective, family values that we learned frequently come from the values, morals, and faith. We would learn a lot of that from our family and our friends. But
don't do that. No.
What?
Right?
Don't do that.
Wait,
yes. Oh, sorry.
Saying,
I thought
don't do that.
I'm not doing anything wrong on this end of the webinar. Everyone.
I don't know. Did you grow up like I did, being told no all the time?
Yes. As I mentioned, I have 3 older sisters.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Now we're going to talk some about the behavior assessment tools that are available. And how does one continue to broaden their ethical perspective? Well, the answer is that you deliberately work on this skill as you would on any skill that you want to improve. It's important to work on these skills both at an individual and a corporate level. In order to know if you are moving in the right direction, it's important to set a baseline. I have 2 very simple tools which can be used to conduct self-assessment at the individual and corporate level. Generally, people think they know where they stand individually or corporately from an ethical perspective. But it's fine to trust, but one should always verify your assumptions. In addition, one should consider having an independent third party periodically conduct assessments to remove the bias from the environment. So the first assessment tool is leadership ethics. Your personal behavior has an impact on the ethical culture around you. Those in leadership positions have an opportunity to influence the ethics of their staff, peers, and the ethical culture of the organization. So when was the last time you thought about how your behavior impacts those around you and the culture of your organization? One way to maintain awareness and increase your positive impact is to use a leadership ethics self-assessment survey. The tool looks at how you as a leader use your actions to demonstrate ethics as a priority, how you communicate your ethics, make decisions, and support the ethics program of your organization. I do have a self-assessment tool, and if anyone requests that tool by sending an email, which will show to my email, which we'll show you later in the presentation, I will email out copies of the self-assessment tool. And the tool is designed to help you identify areas in which you are successfully modeling behaviors that foster an ethical environment and culture, and it's also going to highlight opportunities for improvement. The assessment is designed for leaders at the senior executive and mid-manager level. And this tool will challenge you to think about your own leadership behaviors, and each question suggests the behavior or skill you may wish to develop. So each leader's situation is unique, and you need to think about it within the context of your local situation and whether increasing your use of the behavior or skill could improve your leadership practice and thereby your local ethical environment. And of course, as in any of these ethical surveys and ethical tools, there's no right or wrong answer, and there's no mechanism that we provide for you to calculate an overall score or compare your responses to anyone else. This is purely a self-assessment that you use to make and to improve your own ethical perspective. And immediately following the self-assessment questions in this tool, you'll find an action plan, and you can use it to identify opportunities to improve your leadership practice. And then we recommend that you revisit this assessment on a regular basis. So as I indicated, I'll give you an email shortly that you can send a request for this leadership ethics self-assessment tool.
Yeah, and it's a great what is it, about 4 pages, Elaine? 4 or 5 pages?
Yes.
Of questions that really make you think about how ethics are being applied and talked about and managed within the organization. And whether it will work in your organization, certainly request it. But also if you serve on any boards or any other organizations, the Scouts, whatever it may be, definitely a tool that can be used in other areas, not just the company where you work.
Okay. So when it comes to maintaining ethical behavior within an organization, again, we have the old adage of see no evil, hear no evil, and say no evil, and that no longer holds water. The three ethical monkeys say, I saw that, I heard that, and I'm going to tell, is the culture that we need to foster within our organizations. We need to have an open environment where people are not afraid to be an ethical monkey.
Yeah, and the reality is what we've seen in the past, when did SOX come out, 10 years, 12 years, is that more transparency and more accountability really helps organizations to be more successful. So strong ethics programs really speak to what has really been shown in organizations to help organizations not only succeed but to grow.
So how does one go about assessing their corporate ethical behavior? So one way to assess and measure ethical behavior within an organization is to maintain a balanced scorecard. And the scorecards used to measure the ethical environment or ethical attitude within the organization. I do have a balanced scorecard tool. It's only one page long, and it's a series of questions which are indicators of the ethical environment. But these metrics will vary based upon the organization. So this is a tool that I recommend that you take and compare to your corporate code of ethics or corporate code of conduct and tailor it to what's appropriate for your corporate ethical environment. And since corporate governance is an area of key concern in the post-financial crisis era, ethics from a leadership and organizational perspective is at the core of this corporate governance. And this is an area where you may want to trust but verify. The self-assessment and balanced scorecard tools are only as good as the information provided to complete the tools. As long as human beings are involved in the process, there will be possibility of errors, omissions, or deceit. It generally takes clever and objective people to uncover the deceit and sometimes even the errors and omissions within an organization. Friendships and close working relationships built upon trust can cloud an individual's judgment and make it difficult to complete an objective assessment of the leadership and organizational ethics within your organization. Using a third party who is trained and experienced in conducting ethical business practices assessments can be an effective method for obtaining a clearer picture of the ethical culture of your organization. Now we're going to move on to polling question number 5. And it asks, which method do you think would best enhance the ethical culture within your organization? Okay.
Answers are trending. The technology is working.
And so far, transparency and accountability is taking the lead, right?
Yeah, by about 50% say transparency and accountability within an organization will really help to best enhance an ethical culture, followed by, we're going to close the poll so I can see these numbers on a bigger screen. Okay. Consistent communication within the company. Yeah, transparency and accountability is great. Consistency is key. It really helps. We do what's important frequently. And consistency and communication is a very strong one.
If the employees do not know what you as management expect of them, they're not going to know how to react or how to make ethical decisions.
Right. And mentioning it once when you're hired probably is not the strongest message. So transparency and communication, with the other ones trailing about 8 or 9%. Excellent.
Okay. So now we've gone over corporate ethics and some leadership ethics at the individual level. Another concept that we have is social contracts. The concept of a social contract is based upon the idea that the decision maker imagines the decision as a contract and then imagines changing places with those impacted by the contract. In this way, the decision maker can better appreciate the impact of their decision. For example, the girl walking her dog depicts a common social contract. When you take your dog for a walk or to the park, others have the assumption that they can use the same space without any mishaps such as experienced by the man in the picture. So how does this concept of a social contract relate to ethical decision-making within an organization? We're next going to explore the concept of the corporate social contract. So the relationship between an organization and its stakeholders is called the corporate social contract. In today's society, corporations have a much broader list of stakeholders than we had in the past. The list includes anyone and anything that's impacted by what the organization does. This includes employees, customers, suppliers, lenders, creditors, borrowers, host communities, governments, environmentalists, and of course, your shareholders. For many organizations, the impacts on even one of these groups can be very diverse. Ethical decision-making within the context of this corporate social contract requires that the organization complete several steps in the decision-making process. The organization must first define their ethical values. That is the basis of their corporate social contract, and ethical decisions should be in line with these ethical values. These are generally based on one or a combination of the ethical perspectives which we previously discussed. These ethical values must be codified using value statements, codes of conduct, management example, training, and other means to develop the ethical culture of the organization. When doing business ethics reviews, it's not uncommon to find that the board and senior management team believes and what is codified in writing is not really the reality of the ethical culture within the organization. So in order to fulfill the corporate social contract, the organization must understand all of their significant stakeholders. They need to identify their stakeholders and understand their interest. And without this understanding, an organization cannot fulfill their corporate social contract when making ethical decisions. So one example is child labor. Should an organization take into account the child labor practices in a country when they are deciding if they want to locate a plant in the country? So it's become a very complex process for organizations to make ethical decisions and fulfill their corporate social contract. There are many practical and analytical approaches an organization can use when making ethical decisions. 3 of these are the 5-question approach, moral standards approach, and the past-in approach. The modified 5 questions approach was developed by Tucker, and this approach rates an action based upon 5 key factors. These factors are profitability, legality, fairness, impact on the rights of each individual stakeholder in the environment, and lastly, how does it demonstrate the virtues the stakeholders expect from the organization? The modified moral standards approach was developed by Professor Manuel Velázquez, and this approach focuses on 4 dimensions of the impact of this ethical decision. This impact-based approach is well suited to organizations whose ethical culture is based upon consequentialism or the results or consequences of the ethical decision. This approach appeals to results-oriented individuals. One makes decisions by applying 4 questions related to the benefit to society, fairness, rightness, and virtues. These questions are very similar to the 5 questions approach. The major difference is that this approach has the emphasis on the impact to the stakeholders and less on the impact to the organization or corporation. I've also added, you want to go over, Sam?
Oh, no, I just have a comment about this 4-question approach, which is earlier we were talking about the different models related to ethics, and the 4-question approach actually pulls in from several of the models. It talks about, is it the truth? Is it an absolute aspect, but is it beneficial to all concerned? For example, speaks to consequences based, and is it fair to all concerned? We're back to justice. So we're pulling in from multiple models in order to have the best ethical approach based on a new hybrid model.
Okay. And then my question I have is similar to the modified moral standards. I have a similar 4 questions in green, and I want to know if anybody can tell me what those 4 questions come from. Okay.
I know the answer.
I know Sam knows the answer. Well, in interest of time and moving on, we'll let Sam answer that one.
The answer is, Robert got it right. It's from Rotary. Rotary International, the 4-way test of all the things we think, say, and do. Is it the truth? And you can read the rest of the questions yourself. But it's an ethical test that was put into place to govern the actions of Rotarians as they serve the community. So.
Okay. And the last approach is the modified Paston approach. It was developed by Pastor Mark Paston, and he extends the moral standards and takes into account corporate culture and problems. This approach makes the ethical evaluation based upon a comparison to the company's ground rules. What is important to the organization? The net benefit to the organization and stakeholders, or the endpoint ethics. Does it impinge upon any of the stakeholders' rights and requires rules to resolve the contract or rule ethics? And does it abuse rights which belong to everyone, which is problems of the commons? So again, when making ethical decisions, it's good to have a framework and an approach to help you look at ethics from a balanced perspective and make it a more balanced and corporate ethical decision. And so today we've covered various ethical theories. We've talked about the consequences, rights and obligations, justice and fairness, and virtue. And we learned that ethics has many perspectives and how understanding ethical perspectives will provide us with the understanding to make ethical decisions which are good for the individual, the firm, and society. We also learned that if we follow the hear no evil, see no evil, say no evil mind, our own business philosophy, we become supporters of unethical practices. One should assess ethical situations in an unbiased fashion, and when appropriate say, I saw that, I heard that, and I'm going to tell. Okay? Right.
So thank you very much for listening to the webinar. We're going to cut over to Tyler briefly for a couple announcements, and then we will cut back to us to answer at least one question that was posed and answer any other questions you may have. Tyler?
And also, anyone who has any ahas or takeaways from the seminar today, feel free to post those and we'll share them with the group.
Very good. We just had one question. I'm going to paraphrase it and then give a brief answer, which will be incomplete because the question is actually quite broad. And Elaine actually said, do you have an answer for that? And I said, yes, I have a short answer because the real answer is much longer. And the paraphrasing is... you don't need to apologize, but thanks. Is how can you deal with what is perceived as unfairness or inequality in treatment between upper-level employees and lower-level employees? How do you address differences in how behaviors might be challenged? So if a senior employee does something, they get a harsh talking to, and a low-level employee does something, and instead of a harsh talking to is termination. The answer is, in inequality situations like this, it really depends. That's the first part of the answer. And it requires more transparency and creating a culture or working to develop a culture that will address unfairness and try and create a fair and just culture. That's through transparency and more communication. However, on the other hand, depending on what the leadership looks like, that may not be a culture that you can change from the bottom up. And there are books, the 360-degree leader and different books that speak to how we influence up and down within the organization and how far that influence can really carry. So my recommendations would be to really look at the organization and see how the shaping of policies might help to create that fairness, but more communication and transparency to try and either begin or continue the conversation to make those types of changes. So if there are no other questions, it is 3:01. We appreciate your patience and understanding regarding the technical difficulties and for joining us today. Any parting comments, Elaine?
For joining us, and we do have our email addresses up on the screen, both for Sam and I. Anyone who has an interest on the leadership ethics self-assessment or the balanced scorecard tool that we have available, feel free to send us an email and we'll make sure you get a copy of those tools.
Thanks, and have a great day.
Thank you once again for joining us for this presentation produced by McKonly Asbury. We hope you join us and participate in our upcoming events. You can stay up to date with news and learn about our upcoming events by visiting us at www.macpas.com. Thanks again and have a great day.